Hello, we are here today with German Israeli writer Chaim Noll, and the our conversation will have the title "Fear of the Open World." The title of this conversation actually comes from a book written in German by Chaim Noll, where is using that sentence in German saying Angst vor dem offenen Wort.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the it is what it means. I mean, what we want to say with this title. We live in what has been called the open society, according to the word of Mr. Karl Popper.
Yeah.
But do are we really in a society where it is possible to express, to have open conversation, open words, especially in the public arena,
Yeah.
where we see it's very mostly taken from a narrative from what Adorno used to call the culture industry, a system of media and press that seems to have claimed the right to the right words, and everything else seems to be banned from the public, what once was called the public discourse. What do you
Mm.
think about it?
It is like that. So the space has narrowed during the last years. It was palpable that we lost ground, so to speak. So the discourse became more and more regulated by political correctness, by language restrictions. Uh, a lot of words are, let us say, criminalized. In the meantime, you cannot use them anymore. Certain discussions are a priori delegitimized. So that is a tendency really harming the open discourse. But I must say, in these days, when we look to Russia, for instance, or China, of course, we are still in the wonderful situation that we can talk at all, so that we are not threatened by going to prison or to the gulag or something. As we, so I think about this in these days. I'm very critical about the situation in the West, but now I feel, when I see what happens in Russia, for instance, that we are still on the good side.
Well, for probably I should also mention something extra here, that a little bit more about your story, because you were born actually in a dictatorship. You were born in
Right.
East Berlin in 1954
Under Soviet rule, so to
under
speak.
Soviet
Yeah,
rule, exactly. And
yeah.
basically 7 years before they built the wall, and then for a large
Mm.
part of your life, you have been under this under tyranny. You have been living under hardcore tyranny.
Yeah, we
And
lived 29 years with the Berlin Wall
yeah,
as a symbol of perfect restriction of everything. So we were imprisoned, so to speak, in this small territory of East Germany. We couldn't even go freely to the other communist countries. There was a lot of problems to go even to Hungary, or those places that have been under Soviet rule. And we lived under a total lack of every kind of freedom you know from the West. So that's why I still feel that we are on the better side. When we came to the West, it was like a revelation to experience how it is to live in freedom and freedom of speech, for instance. And that's why I'm very sorry that this is reduced during the last years. That you feel that also in the West, the freedom of speech is is losing ground, and space, so to speak. The space is narrowed. But I cannot forget what I experienced in my youth when it was 100,000 times worse.
Yes, because you were living under a rigid totalitarian state. I in the years I've tend to believe that there are actually several forms of totalitarianism. Of course, there is the
Mm.
hardcore totalitarianism that could be the
Yeah.
Soviet, the Russians, the
Mm.
Nazi, etc., the GDR. But there is also a soft form of totalitarianism that
Right. Yeah.
stops you even from thinking the wrong ideas, which
Yeah.
actually is more efficient. And we have seen, now that you pointed that out, the limitations of freedom of speech that comes from actually mostly from private from the private sector, and
Mm.
speech has been limited exactly in the moment where speech can make a difference, when speech can start moving the conscience, the inspire
Yeah.
people. So is it, this is my question for you, it is it is a real freedom of speech to let you tell only words that have no consequences, but as soon as your words start having consequences, then we are there with the scissors and the censorship.
Yeah. I agree with you that there is a tendency also in democracy to move into that direction. I think that totalitarian tendencies are human, obviously. That every society tends to has a certain inclination in times of crisis, for instance, to regulate life, and that we have also to defend the freedom of speech in the West. We can't take it for granted. It's not like that. There are always uh, powers and always groups in society who try to limit the freedom of speech and the freedom of thinking, because freedom of thinking is losing a space when the freedom of speech is losing space. There are um, uh, speech and words, also written words, and thought are so deeply connected that in the moment when you start thinking about what you are allowed to speak and to write, you also limit your thought in your brain. So that is a problem, that it is not without consequences for the creativity of society. That's why it is so threatening that when we start restricting free discussion, free discourse in society, when we start to um, prohibit certain sectors of um, discussion, then automatically we start to restrict this in our brain. And there will be no go areas, fences, barriers, and so on, also in our brain. I can tell you that we witnessed that in our youth, that people, when it is strictly impossible to say something, when you said in East Germany, the man in the Kremlin is a criminal, you were taken to prison and probably never returned. So you didn't say that, of course, and after some years you didn't even think it anymore. People stop thinking that what is forbidding to express.
Mhm.
That's a mechanism we have to accept, that it is human. And in a society where we start to restrict speech, we start to restrict thought.
Yeah, the Dutch
And this
psychiatrist. So,
this is a problem because Western society lives on the, for instance, technological um, high standards. We are on a higher standard than other countries, and can um, that's why secure our situation because of our high creativity. But in the moment we restrict free speech and free writing, we damage our creativity in the brain. That's the problem. And this will be a real loss for the Western society. It starts in humanities and fields where people say that's not so interesting. Literature, I'm not interested in literature. But in the end, it will also limit the thought of the rocket specialists or the doctors in the hospital. There is no end with that process. When you start uh, limiting speech and limiting thought, this will be a real damage for Western society, especially because we live on that.
You see, and this where what you're describing were actually trademarks of authoritarian societies that have been analyzed in details. I was mentioning Jos Merlo, the Dutch
Mm.
psychiatrist, that analyzes this in a book called The Rape of the Mind, where he
Yeah.
analyzes this thought control mechanism from the
Mhm.
Gestapo to the Soviets.
Yeah.
And you know, Lipton, for example, used to say that there are words that are thought terminating cliche. Today, for example, you can see this in the use of the media of certain keywords. For
Yeah.
example, think in Germany, one word like if you would have said in before 2020 the word Querdenker, which is
Querdenker.
lateral
Yeah.
thinker, you know,
Yeah.
people would have thought about Einstein, about
Yeah.
because Einstein was the quintessential Querdenker.
Yeah.
The media managed to take a
They
positive
turned
concept
it into a
and turned it upside
pejorative.
down.
Yeah. Hmm.
High this is manipulation. These are manipulation techniques that have to make us worried,
Yeah.
not just because of a bunch of gazetteer are trying to do this, because you know one of the other thing that we never really pay much attention is how many people can manipulate an entire country of 60, 80, 100 million people. If you count all people working in media, in the corporate media, let's call it,
Hmm.
you have, I mean, for a country like Germany, Italy, you will have probably a few thousand people. If you
Yeah.
include editor, etc., you would have five,
Yeah.
10,000, which is nothing compared
A
to a
small
population
group.
of 80
Yeah.
million. So this small minority of people
Yeah.
which have formally no education, no real training,
Yeah.
because that's another thing. If you would have opened any around in Europe or even in the United States 100 years ago, you would have struggled to find probably you would have found some typographical error, which is evident, but not grammar error, no sentences that are
Hmm.
completely absurd, not this continuous
Hmm.
call
Hmm.
to the emotion instead to the rationality. Because we keep you see, even in the now from the crisis in 2020 until now, whenever you open any of this or watch any of this TV, the first call is to your emotion, not to your
Yeah.
speech. Oh, I don't. Even in the speeches of I don't know, presidential debate. A presidential debate in the United States, it's like every question is 5 minutes. It shows that it is missing the dimension of the thinking, of the analysis. Nobody make appeal to your brain, everybody
Yeah.
makes appeal to your stomach, and that's manipulation.
Uh, of course it is, and a part of it, I think, is inevitable because at least the politicians and the media people calculate that the broad majority, as they think, is not capable to grasp complex thought in a short time. And I think they underestimate most people, by the way. So when you talk to people privately, you often see that they are more intelligent than they are considered to
Of
be
course,
by the politicians, for instance.
of
But
course.
there is a strange situation that in the moment of mass movements and mass for instance, mass hysteria or mass schizophrenic phenomenons, people really stop thinking analytically and critically and follow the given keywords. And that's why I fear that those circles use that instrument, so they cause situations of mass hysteria, for instance, because they know in that moment even intelligent people stop thinking critically and become completely emotionally moved, for instance, by fear. They use fear, in my eyes, as an instrument in the meantime. They cause fear.
Yes.
Uh, Corona was the best experience we had with that. The media systematically used fear to intimidate the
Yes.
populace, to let them lose their critical view. So it wasn't even questioned anymore what politicians did. They forbade everything, and we went along with that because we were all in, or most of us, in a constant state of fear. Only a few people were not. So those few people cannot change the currency. That's a problem. When you find means uh, to set the entire society in a state of fear and angst and tensions that make people emotionally reacting, so then those few thousand people, politicians and media people, can direct everything in society. So we have to deal with our fears. I quoted in the Corona time. I quoted a famous Russian dissident who went to the United States, who wrote a book. Unfortunately, I forgot the title in English. It was published in the United States. In German, it was Entsage der Angst. So stop being directed from your fears, from your angst and anxieties. He came from the Soviet Union. His name was Nekrit. He was a Jew, and he started criticizing the very dilettantic uh, war tactics in the first time of the Soviet of the big war between Soviet Union and Germany. He was the first one who wrote about the mistakes Stalin made in military tactics and so on. And of course, there was an outcry, and he was taken out of the party and everything. And he emigrated to the Soviet Union. He said his most important experience was that you have to overcome your fear to be a free person. If you are directed by your own angst, those people can play with you and make a puppet out of you. So that's the problem.
You know, you reminded me of a sentence, a phrase by Krishnamurti, who used to say, "Is there fear without the word fear?"
Yeah,
Which brings us again to the topic of the open world. You know,
yeah,
uh, in many ways, we keep forgetting, and it is kind of scary that brought to fear so easily. Because I understand a child can be scared if you tell the child there is a ghost under your bed, but an adult is an adult when he would look under the bed, when he would, you remember the key, most important political statement by Kant über the Enlightenment, where he said, "Have the courage to use your own German
right.
Vernunft, your intellect,
Yeah,
your
it's a
your your
matter of
mind."
courage. Yeah.
A- and that's a sign of adulthood. So, what do we have to say? Do you remember that text that in the 80s was very famous by amusing ourselves to death, where Neil Postman described as basically a society that instead of progressing was regressing into games, into, I
Yeah.
mean,
Amusement. Yeah. Yeah.
amusement.
Yeah.
Exactly. Instead of culture, amusement. It's clear that
Yeah.
this sets your mind on backward instead than
Right.
forward.
Yeah.
You will really, I mean, how many adults today you hear, and it's kind of scary, that spend their time playing video games. I'm nothing against a good game, a good chess game,
Yeah.
a good
Of course.
something that
Yeah.
challenges you, something that also brings you into a social context, mahjong
Yeah.
with some other person. But this solitary activity, it's kind of numbing, and then you see how the society has been reduced to people obeying to a big
Right.
screen.
Yeah. I
Well,
would
but this
agree
is
with you that that fun society is a preparation for society of fear. The
yes,
problem is that in Western societies that have become more and more fun societies during the last 2 decades, the anxiety grew, so that people feel more anxious than in countries where they live on a daily basis with a feeling of that life can be difficult and problematic. When you live in a artificial feeling of fun, as it obviously has been in many Western countries because of the feeling of security. They felt too much secure in these countries. They forgot about the dangers of life. So we grew up in Eastern Europe, where we always have been confronted with fear and with the dangers of life, and thus we couldn't forget about it. When we came to the West, we were astonished to see how people lost all the feeling for the dangerous sides of life. And fun society is a kind of lulling people so they come into a state of losing their so they're not really awake. So that's maybe the woke movement comes from that people from the fun society suddenly realize life can be problematic, and now they become woke and want to fight against that they feel as something they as something fearful, forbidding. I see that people in the United States, for instance, after decades of fun society, are much more exposed to those influences causing mass fear phenomenons. So it's easier in those countries, in my eyes, to make people to manipulate people, because they lose the, and maybe there is some you need some level in your own psychological structure to be aware of it. They lost the awareness of things that can become dangerous, and that makes them easily that makes it easy to manipulate those people.
Fromm wrote this famous book, Escape from Freedom. We can also say that escape from freedom is also an escape from pain and also an escape from choice. This is a correlation between these things. And I
Yeah,
find personally, you mentioned the walk, they like to call this pseudo fanatism of the modern society as a movement. And I find extremely sad that when you think about it, it's again the same phenomenon that we were discussing earlier. It's a few thousand people, paid people in corporate media and academia, creating this pseudo hysteric fanatism of the
yeah.
21st
An
century.
atmosphere of an atmosphere of fear they create.
But
Um,
you see, it's what Adorno used to say, that one of the big problems he saw in society was the decline of the logical evidence. This
yeah,
type of movements, which in their form, I've studied
are
sectarian.
completely illogical. They are completely
Exactly.
illogical.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And it's not, they don't care about that. It's
no.
all a power type of movement. We are on the side of power. The gazetteer, the media are with us, so we can
Mm,
destroy people. But it is extremely sad that we are forced to discuss this type of nonsense. And that reminds me the
mm.
beautiful sentence of a famous scholar, a Talmudist, who used to say that nonsense is nonsense, but the study of nonsense is scholarship.
Yeah,
And we are forced to discuss these things, even
absolutely.
if, yeah, but we are forced to discuss these things even if there is no discussion. You see, one of the reasons why recently I also started inviting people, friends, to have discussion, public discussion, is also to show that what most people watch on the corporate media, on the state paid TV, is not discussion. It's
No,
something else. It's prevarication, it's sophistry, it's the prevailing
yeah,
of some interest over the other. But it's not a discussion like we are doing. We are just talking, exchanging, trying to exchange ideas. This art of conversation is almost lost in an age that called itself the knowledge age. Isn't
yeah.
that interesting?
It is interesting. We have the means, we have the possibility of getting knowledge, but we
Yeah,
don't use it.
yeah.
So we spend our time with substitutes. It's real work to get knowledge, of course. People are not really interested in having to do real work to study the depth of the problems. So they are content with the light, with the version light of everything, and that's what the media do. Um, they they give us simplifications of everything. They
Yes.
make it easy to feel informed without really being, to feel knowing without really knowing.
Yes.
So we would need some more time and more labor to go into that, but people don't like that, of course, many people. So they are content with what they see in television and in the internet. And the internet, of course, is a very dubious institution with a lot of possibility to get knowledge, but also to destroy knowledge and to distract you from knowledge and spend your time with substitutes that it is gone and you have learned nothing. But I think that's a part of human nature that many people prefer that version light of everything, and thus they are too easily to manipulate. And this is what we saw in the corona time, that you can cause a kind of haze of pseudo information, crypto information that in reality does not inform, but to distract your mind and makes you puzzled and dizzy and drowsy instead of being clear and capable to react. The problem is, in the moment of crisis, you have to react rationally. You have to think clearly, and those mechanisms destroy the clearest thought, and thus capability to react helpfully just in times of crisis and catastrophes. That's what we saw in the corona time, that entire societies behaved absolutely nonsensical, so absolutely absurd over long periods, not only for some weeks, but over years
Yeah.
in sometimes. And that for instance, the question of wearing a mask that from a when you think about it thoroughly, you cannot stop spreading a virus with wearing a mask. But it became a question of life or death wearing the mask. So you were criminalized in the moment you didn't wear it. You were taken out of the train or the plane when you didn't wear the mask. So no one asked about it. That there were only a few countries who didn't do that in that extreme way. Most of it behaved extremely absurd in my eyes.
Yes.
But the majority
Except Sweden.
obviously accepted this
We
because
did.
they were in a state of fear and haze and not thinking clearly anymore. I learned
Yeah,
in
but
this time that when people start to fear, it's like a stampede. You cannot stop a stampede by standing in front of it and saying, stop. They will run you over and kill you. You have to step aside. That's the problem. So those people who were still thinking clearly couldn't do anything anymore when the populace of entire countries turned into a stampede.
yeah, but you see, you're opening here to a big I mean, several big questions because first of all, um, can we? I understand that the 20th century has been opened through works like Le Bon and the Psychology of the
Yeah,
Masses, and then
yeah.
Bernays, etc. So we see
Canetti, yeah,
this our time as the age of the masses, and masses are seen basically what in the in the 20th century, what in the 19th century were the mobs or the crowds. So something that it behaves like an animal, like a being without a brain, and this was the paradigm of the dictators of the last century. But
hmm.
is this true? I mean, my question, you see, the Milgram experiment, everybody
Yeah,
talks about the Milgram experiment. They like
yeah,
the doctor gives the order to
yeah.
electrocute some person in
Terrible
the other
story.
room.
Yeah,
But my question, and we make an inference from this experiment saying, okay, that's how human beings behave. But
yeah,
is it really how human beings behaved? From a scientific point of view, when we have a subject that has been taken from this type of society with this type of conditioning, and then we bring that subject in that room with Dr. Milgram, isn't the experiment already falsified by the fact that you are taking a person that has already been disturbed in his psychological development, in his abilities to understand, to resist? So, my question here is the problem in the individual, i.e., in the masses, or is the problem in the political power and the society that creates this type of human being? Like in the GDR. In the GDR, I'm sure you have met party members, people that were, and no matter what the party was doing,
yeah.
they were yes
Of
men, and
course.
you
Yeah,
saw dissident. You were one of them. You were one of those dissidents. So
I wasn't always a dissident, and in my childhood, I was educated in the communist
yeah,
ideology perfectly. So I'm an educated Marxist, I can say. I know Marxism much better than many people in the West. My parents were totally assimilated Jews who became communists. That was their consequence from the Nazi time, that they said the communists fought the Nazis, so we become communists because we are against the Nazis. That wasn't very smart in my eyes, but they believed in it, and they had a very disturbed relationship to religion. They found that Judaism is something from dark ages and has nothing to do with modernity, and they became communists and considered this an enlightened ideology, and I was educated in this. And the what I learned was that the problem of communism was that the ideologists gave people the feeling they knew it all. The
Yes.
Marxist was ready, was capable to look into everything, to uh, explain how the world works. We were godlike new Neuer Menschen, new human beings. Uh, that was um, the ideology I grew up with, and it gives you a wrong feeling of superiority. In reality, you are stupid and ignorant. So, and this took some time for me to learn. So when I became a young man, I was against the system more and more and became a dissident. But I have experienced the entire way from being completely manipulated in my childhood and really believing what they said until the point when I started to understand that everything, that the complete ideology was nonsense. But this took a lot of time. So I remember when my wife read, there was a Russian writer, a novelist, Trifonov, Yuri Trifonov, who wrote about the Stalinist time and the killing of millions of people in this time. And but he went deeper, and he went back to the beginning of the revolution. And we were at the point that we said, okay, Stalin was a criminal, but the entire thing was a great revolution. And of course, the October Revolution was still holy for us. And I remember that I came one day home from my studio, and my wife sat in our sitting room with one of the novels of Trifonov when he wrote about the early time of the Soviet Union and the um, ideological discussions these people had. They could talk openly at this time still in the Tsarist area. All these circles of young Marxistic intellectuals could talk openly. And she read what they were talking about. She said to me, I come to the point that it was nonsense from the beginning on, because the idea itself to change the world into something better is complete nonsense. We cannot change the world into something better. We are human beings made by our creator in a certain way, and we can make ourselves better. That's the Jewish way to say, I can start with myself. When I make myself a better human being, I contribute a very small piece to making the world a better place. But we cannot do it by mass movement and ideology. And that was the communist approach, and also of many Western leftish movements, that they say, if we solve the climate problem, we make the world a better place. That's nonsense. You cannot, with those general solutions, change the world. This will always lead into terrible misuse of power. Every attempt to all these ways, whatever it was, whether having the Chinese or in Cambodia and wherever, when people thought they could generally change the world, it ended up with concentration camps. That was the problem, because you have always people who do not believe that, and changing the world means in the end to put these people out of the way, because they disturb the brave new world, the phantom of a changed world, and these people have to be killed, and there will be more and more. So in the end, it ends with a society of concentration camps. So that's the problem. So when you understand this, that every idea of a general change of the world as it is made by human beings. I mean, God can change the world overnight. We know. There happen things we cannot explain, catastrophes, war. Nobody can, in hindsight, really explain what happened. It happened. But the idea that people with a kind of a plan or so change the world, a plan fully made by man, it's complete nonsense. I don't believe in that. So, and this was the way we had to go. And then you couldn't believe anymore in the solutions Marxism offered. Marxism offered the solution that when you solve the class problem, that there is no social inequality anymore and no social injustice anymore, then the world will be a perfect place. This is messianism. But messianism is a religious movement, and as a religious movement, I can accept it. I, for my part, don't believe that I will see the Mashiach, the Messias, come one day. So there are Jewish scholars who say the coming of the Messias will always be a future event. It's something we are longing for, but we cannot really believe it will happen in my lifetime. But communists believe they can change the world in their lifetime. They can do something to turn the world around, and that's, in my eyes, the most dangerous kind of thinking. And that's what also in the West always will attract some people. And it starts with a little journalist who thinks, who dreams of influencing people. I remember that I was in a university in Britain some 20 years ago as a visiting lecturer, and I had to talk to the students. They came to my office and talked to me about what they were interested in. And there was a boy who told me he dreams of becoming a writer because this is so much power. This gives you so much power over people when you can influence them by the word. And I said to him, that's the wrong approach. That's not a way to start writing, that you dream of influencing people. That's, in my eyes, a bad approach. But people are dreaming of that. They dream of power. And ideology is power. And so you have to learn that you have to abstain from all these simple ideologic solutions people offer, but they do every day anew.
Well, are they solutions, as you say, ideologic solutions or simplifications? Because you were referring, for example, the not just to the communist ideology, but also to the application of certain certain plans, like the 7-year plan, etc. But a plan is already a direction, therefore, is a limitation of freedom. I
Of
mean,
course.
the
Yeah.
possibility of changing, and we can even go back theologically, is not changing the world, but allowing people the possibility to see what's better, which is something that it's contained in.
Sorry. I have to switch off the telephone.
Okay,
Yeah.
can you still hear?
I come back. Yeah. I had to switch off the telephone.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no.
Yeah.
So, but the problem is that these ideas were already at the origin of history. The possibility of, for example, you were mentioning theological arguments, and of course Marxism is basically a messianism
It
for
is a
many
messianism.
reasons
Yeah.
that many scholars have pointed that out already. But um, I had just a note about Trifonov. One, I read this an historian who wrote about the early times of the Russian Revolution, answering the question why these intellectuals were free to publish their work. And the historian said, because they were absolutely influential and nobody
Yeah.
read their works, so that's why they were allowed. And actually even Lenin, that he wrote this very cumbersome works, he wrote them in such a difficult way so that the czarist censorship, they got so bored and they said, yeah, whatever, you publish whatever you want. But I mean,
Yeah.
apart from this little anecdote, uh, you see, the possibility of change, if you read the Bible, the book of Genesis or the Bereshit, it starts with what? With the Almighty giving what to the first two characters? The real gift, the real great gift is the gift of freedom, of choice. They have the choice.
Yeah.
You can pick that fruit or you
Yeah.
can.
The
And
freedom
that
of decision. Yeah, right.
the
The
freedom,
freedom
and
of
and that's
decision.
exactly where the
Mm,
tyrannical, the totalitarian, where the fascism
right.
goes against your freedom, because I firmly believe that the world can change if you
Mm,
change people, if you make them see that there
mm,
is another way of living. For example, if you start pointing, instead of having a amusement system, instead of having a fully pragmatic, dramatically goals oriented society, you start having a communitarian society. Think of the experience of the kibbutzim, for example, or
the book of
an
yeah,
alternative. It is possible, but not
yeah,
by force. That's the point. I mean,
yeah,
when you make people understand, you said yourself, you grow up as a communist, but then at some point, you so sorry, connection
yeah.
problem.
There's a problem at the moment with the. I don't understand you.
Yeah, we lost you for
Yeah,
a bit. But I mean, the
yeah,
point was that you yourself, you saw the bullshit that was that teaching that they were giving you before, and then you changed because you understood.
yeah,
And that's the real change. That's the only possible change. When somebody comes from the top and tells you, you have to do
yeah.
this because I know better than you, that's not change. That's
No, you have to do it yourself, of
just
course.
authoritarianism. That's
Yeah.
just an old burden of our species.
I think the book of Genesis you mentioned is a very
Yes.
good example for
Yes.
how the Bible and why the Bible is so successful. Let us say it this way: when you read the book of Genesis, it's interesting that most of it are is storytelling about humans. There is no theory in this book. There is storytelling about the patriarchs and their wives and their children and their families and how they struggled and how they made mistakes and whatever. So you can only learn by mistakes. That's some experience we have to make. So we never really learn from success. Success is rather corrupting your critical view of things. When you make mistakes, that's the Bible is using that very successfully, showing that people learn from their mistakes and that things go another way than they thought. They sell their brother to Egypt. Hopefully, they will never see him again, and then they will be happy one day that he is there. And he says to them that it was wrong what you did, but in the end, it turned out to be a rescue to that I can give you corn now. Whatever he gave them to in the time of hunger they had in Canaan, where they came from. So the problem is that you learn from the book of Genesis that people making mistakes because they have the free decision to do right or wrong. that this way is much more successful than a way when you limit and restrict them from the beginning on, because a group of people says, we know what is right and wrong, and we make it impossible for you to make mistakes. You will go the right way with us. There is
Exactly.
only that one way, the right way, and all other things going astray, we will make impossible. So that is not the way people learn. People can understand anything, and that's a problem also today. That I think that certain circles in Western society, for instance, the media, believe they knew better than other
Yeah.
people. A part of it is already destroyed by the internet. Before the internet, really, the media people were better informed than the rest of the populace. Because they got on their ticker all day. They got the information coming in from the news agencies, and they knew every minute what happened, and they could misuse that and select information and all that. You cannot really select information today anymore, because the things taken out in this process of news selection are available in the internet. You can see what is sorted out in the internet. So that makes it more impossible, more difficult for the media people to manipulate people than it has been, let's say, 20 years ago when the internet didn't work. That's why they use other methods. And I think that causing an atmosphere of fear is one of the new instruments we see. And it's more and more problematic, because we all have to deal with a lot more problems than we had, let's say, 10 years ago. Prices are going up, gas and everything will become more expensive. People have more problems to how to live on their wages and on their income. So people have to think about money much more than 5 years ago, and the problems will increase with the crisis now with Russia. There will be certain ground materials not available anymore in this extent we had it in the last decades. For instance, wood for paper. Um, Paper will be a real problem. I remember in my childhood in the East that paper was always a problem, because paper was expensive and these countries were poor and couldn't buy enough paper from the West. So the question of paper became also an instrument of selection. We cannot publish this book because of lack of paper. And now we are at the same point in the West, that the publishing houses, paper prices are rising, prices for everything. Publishing houses come into real pressure worldwide. In the West, smaller houses, but the smaller publishers were the only ones who published problematic books. The big houses are mainstream oriented and don't publish books that go into the depth or something. So we have more and more the problem that the given material parameters are really against us more and more, and this makes it easier, of course, to cause an atmosphere of fear and anxiety in society. You can cause that easily today, and this is something I'm very really concerned about. And I think reading the Bible can really help in these days to see how people in extreme situations nevertheless found their way by with a lot of errors and so on, but in the end believing in certain humanist principles, we can keep them upright also in times of duress and pressure. This is what we can learn from this book. That's why it's so successful. Maybe I think that stories of Job or other stories of people who were in real distress. We should read this now and read what how they deal with that. The Fun Society will not help at the moment because it's over. Fun Society is over because of the dark things that happen now and come dark times ahead. We all know that.
Yeah, but one of the thoughts that come to mind regarding the situation is that large part of the issues we are experiencing right now in the world, of which you mentioned a few, are not made from nature, are mostly made from human beings, from a
Yeah,
specific direction that our society has taken, from the fact that we are still to the point that we do not consider war and destruction something that has to be repudiated from our history, from the fact that we are still child in front of history, but we are dangerous child with atomic weapons. This is one
right.
of the big issues here. And
Yeah,
yes, how can you?
with the possibility just to destroy the world, really to destroy life on the world. Yeah, that's of course much more given than in all times before. Men in the Middle Ages couldn't, let us say, poison the atmosphere,
No.
but we can. We can
Yes.
and we do. So that's the problem. Yeah, that that is the real problem. So we talked about that the Bible avoids theory. The, the book of Genesis avoids theory and tries to tell the points the reader shall understand by storytelling, by a
Mm.
method of literature. It's like fictional literature. It's not so the rabbis always stress on that. They say it's a better way to making people understand than theories. That's why I'm a little bit I try to avoid theories what we can do better when we talk about the future. Of course we can do better a lot of things, but in my eyes we have to start everyone with himself, with
Yes.
themselves. That's the
Yes.
problem. So
Yes.
that the approach of Buddha, for instance, Buddhism or Judaism, both religions who stress on the self fulfillment of everyone, himself or herself, to make to avoid to learn from my mistakes, to avoid doing that. But I'm really recoiling from giving new theories what we have to do better in future. I'm not sure it will be better then.
Well, I believe we if we go back to ancient wisdom, we have many answers to these questions. You have Socrates that asks you to know yourself better, as you said, to start from yourself. And I
Yeah,
believe if there is a big theological lesson, one of the many that we can derive from the biblical message, and in particular, we were talking about the book of Genesis, is one very important and going back to the topic of freedom fact about the Hashem, the Lord, that in front of when he creates the world, when he creates the first human being, he doesn't say the first human being is good. But he said that the nature was good, the sun was good, the
yeah,
earth was good. But in front of the human being is not saying that. And why is
yeah,
that? Because the absolute power, and again, but power on a sense, on a level that for us it's unimaginable. That's why the Jewish tradition says, pay no attention to any concept of the divine, because who are you? The book of Job.
yeah,
Where
yeah.
were you when I created the
Mm,
sky and the
mm,
stars?
mm.
But the reason why the Almighty, the absolute power, doesn't say that the human being is good, because he wants still to give the human being his freedom to choose. And if the
Right.
Lord says you are good, then you have no other choice. You have to be good. And the Lord doesn't want that. So if
No.
the absolute
No.
power wants us in the mythical story to have
Hmm.
freedom as a determinant of our condition,
Yeah.
existential condition, I believe that the way of freedom, respect the freedom, promote freedom is the key here. Don't you think?
I agree with you, and this is really what the Bible's, the Mosaic books are stressing on. It is repeated in, I think, in the fifth book, that again the freedom of decision is declared the ground principle of the
Yes.
relationship between God and man, that God gives man the freedom of decision for wrong and good, and everyone can do that at every time of his life, and the Bible never declares, except of a lot of things that are forbidden, and then we have to think about the context of time, why it was forbidden in that harsh way, and so on. But many of it was later on by the rabbis made, let's say, livable. So they adapted things to the times coming where the situation changed. So we never should forget that the Bible was written and edited in a certain period when people had certain problems. So that's why the rabbinical point to change with the times is right. So they see in the text the possibility, because of the freedom of decision, also to adapt the so-called mitzvot, so the commandments. There is a part in, we read every Shabbat in synagogue. It's strictly forbidden to make fire on Shabbat.
Yes.
But then there is a chapter in the Talmud where a lot of exceptions are listed. When you feel melancholic or depressed or something, or when you are ill. So in the end, there is a lot of ways to come out of any really dangerous situation. People could bring themselves in by strictly following those commandments in every situation. That's not like how Judaism works. So Judaism tries to give people the possibility to survive, and that means that the biblical commandments are interpreted by the rabbis in a way that always the survival is the main point.
Yes.
So it shall never turn into something anti-human. And in the moment it turns into something anti-human, and every theory has a tendency to turn into something anti-human. So then the rabbis found ways, and still find, and these discussions will never end. And there is a lot also here in Israel movement in that. So a lot of also real fighting and so on between the different rabbinical groups about how to interpret commandments in a certain situation. They had to change here in Israel a lot of things, for instance, because the priority of survival is given. It is written in the Bible, you shall live by them. That is in the fifth book. You shall live with the commandments, not make an ordeal out of it, a kind of torture for humans. So that's very, very important, and that's what, for instance, Marxism not was capable to avoid, that it turned into something anti-human in the end. So, but the biblical thinking is capable of that, and that's why this book is immortal in my eyes, and we can read it today with a lot of and learn a lot of that the survival of humans is the God's idea that we are still here, that in dark times, in good times, bad times, but everything has to be made for our survival, and we have also to adopt biblical commandments in the moment that could be misinterpreted in a way. For instance, not using a weapon on Shabbat is impossible in Israel. So they had to learn that the security forces have to use their telephone and have to use all those things that are forbidden to the other people. So, or to those who follow the commandments. Also, very religious soldiers use their telephone on Shabbat when there is a dangerous situation. So that had to be learned. It has always to be learned. I mean, the Bible is a limited corpus. It has only a limited number of words. So in such a limited way, you cannot really give the entire truth about the world. That's something the rabbis say at the beginning, that the Bible is only a, let's say, condensed fashion of that what really should to be said, and that's why they made such a lot of more books out of it, and the entire Talmudic literature trying to explain that for all thinkable situations that cannot find place in the Bible. Kill something who is breaking the Shabbat law, or kill a woman who betrays her husband is not realistic in our times, and will not be practiced. And that's what the rabbis had to do. And in this context, also Jesus is a very interesting contribution. He was a rabbi, and he was a Pharisee, and from a very good school. He came from Bet Hillel, from this rabbinical direction. And when you read the New Testament, you see that also he thought all the time how to make things the way that people can live on that. So, and a lot of the strict rules in the Torah text you cannot really do the way it is in that short version formulated in the Mosaic books. And that's why the rabbis said we cannot let this stand alone. We have to give a literature of explanation and possibilities to live with that in all the situations that history will bring. And we don't know what we cannot foresee the future. There may be a lot of things coming. For instance, the new foundation of the State of Israel was an event without example beforehand. So that has never happened before, that the state had a revival after 2,000 years of people being all over the world, coming back to the place and starting anew in this country. So a lot of things had to be rethought in that moment, and will be done in future. And I think that's a good model for what we all have to do, not to make new theories, but to always to think how we can make that, how we can handle it in a way that people can live with that it gives us a kind of human of humanistic life. So with the values we have, and the honor people need, and the way we treat each other, so that it never turns into something inhuman, as most of theories tend to do. And this is what we have to learn, I think, with the challenges the future will bring, war, for instance, that we still behave like human beings. And that's what we see now. It's not easy. We see how the Russian soldiers behaved, obviously, in Ukraine, that it is easily done that people lose their human orientation and behave not like human beings anymore, and start to kill each other without any sense, and kill civilian population and so on. So to make borders here, not in our thinking. So it's all thinkable, and we are capable to do that, of course. But to try to keep humanity alive, that's all we can do, I think.
The connection, we lost you a couple of times. The connection is getting
Yeah,
quite bad. Probably it's a hint for us to go to a end of this nice conversation. And I just wanted to add one small thing to what you said. It's you pointed to the Talmudic discussion and what's after the Talmudic discussion, Nachmanides, Maimonides, etc. But all of these points toward a construction of a hierarchy of values that we can also call a foundational ethics. And this is possible only, once again, through the exchange of ideas, open word, dialogue. It's not a coincidence that Socrates used to say that the dialogue is the megistos agaton, is the greatest good, because it's
yeah,
through the dialogue that we can build also this universe of meaning, which is, in the experience of the cultural history of our species, a universe of peace. And that's what we mostly need. So I'll give you the closing words, and then I will just thank you after that.
yeah, I agree with you that the process of discussion is the best way to come near to something like truth. I'm very skeptical about being in the possession of any truth. I
Yeah.
know from myself that my truth changes maybe every day, and that's what human beings are. That in the moment we say we possess the truth about something, that's wrong, of course. So discussion is always shaking that. So you go into a discussion with a certain um, thought that you have think they are uh, they are true, and you go out maybe out of the discussion and no, they are not true anymore. So the discussion has brought that into movement, and that's why I think such a discussion as we had today should not try to have a result. We cannot have a result here and say we come to a conclusion what we have to do now in future. But we can discuss these things, and that's the real problem in the moment when you start discussion. Of course, is always something dangerous. Also, people don't like um, uh, to become insecure about their truth. So they live with certain ideas and a code of conduct and so on. They want to keep that. It's more easy to live like that when you live all your life the same way and think the same in the same direction. And discussion is always a danger that you lose that, and that's why many people try to avoid discussion and become nervous in the moment you start with a discussion. And that's what happens in our society, that people have always the tendency to limit that, to limit discussion and to say we cannot talk about this, and to use certain words must be forbidden. You shall not call a black person this or that. And in Germany, it's like it's you cannot use words that are traditional in language about a certain kind of a cake because it's black and was called, let us say, Mohrenkopf. This is forbidden to use that word. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to limit, for instance, tradition. You cannot limit tradition. Tradition is given because it has been like that. And the traditions of language are given. And you cannot eradicate traditions from, they are documented for God's sake. So we live in a society of writing. Human life has completely changed in the moment when the alphabet was developed and everything could be written down. So from this point on, these several thousand years, when we can make chronicles of everything, our life has completely changed, because it's not possible to deny anything afterwards, because it's written and you find some witness, some written witness of what really has happened and what people have thought, and that's why it's impossible. For instance, modern people tend to correct history. That's impossible. History has been as it was, and we have to live with that, with all the crimes and all the bloody times and all that we have done. It's not possible to limit this kind of thing. There will always someone remember that. People try, for instance, to limit memory. They say we shouldn't remember that anymore. That was bad. We shouldn't think about that anymore. No, that's not the way. We have to think about everything, how dirty we are, what criminals we are, how bloody we are. We say that on Yom Kippur in synagogue. We have betrayed, we have stolen. Of course, we are human beings. And at the moment you start to clean society, it's that principle of cleansing, and that's what we know from the communist times. That once it started to make things better by making the world cleaner than it can be, so that ends always in concentration camp. And that's why that may be my concluding remarks, that we have to fight for the freedom of speech, for the broadest discussion that is possible, with all the nonsense, with all the mistakes that is included, because we are human beings, and not to start to regulate our speech, our writing, and in the end our thought, because this will really harm, damage our capability to survive.
I completely agree with you, Chaim, and I can only add that whenever the discussion is not possible, that's always the beginning of a failure, a cultural failure on the side of the society and on the individual. That's why the society should encourage discussion and not
Yeah,
discourage. And that shows
yeah.
us in what kind of time we are. Anyway, I thank you very much for this great conversation, and I hope the listener enjoyed that as much as I did. Thank you, and shalom.
Thank you for the interesting afternoon. I have to think a lot now afterwards. Hope to see you soon.
Me
Bye bye.
too. Bye.
Yeah, bye.